Good evening, stormy evening here in Lamberton near Tavistock. It's kicking it down outside, blowing a hoolie. And here in Real Love Guitars we have Jim's Bernie Marsden SE245 signature-y edition thing. And yeah, what have we got? Well, it's the first one of these I've seen, and I think it'd be fair to say that the reason for that is mostly these are reputed to be great quality, so don't expect to see really bad players in. And to be fair, this isn't a bad player, so this has come down. Jim wants me to make it the best it can be, so the first thing I did with this was to give it a play and see what if anything was wrong with it. What I found was that it does have some choke outs on the high E, and I think from my point of view there's two issues. One is it doesn't stay in tune very well, and the second one is that it chokes out on the very high E bends. Now these are 11s to 52s, so they're quite beefy, as any ball would call them, but I can still hear that they're choking out. So if you play this, it's gone. So obviously the aim will be to restore those notes back to playing. What do we have here in the SE? Well, like I say, it's a great one for me because it's the first time I played an SE or two before, but this is the first one of these. And feel of it, nice. It's a kind of single cut style, as you can see. It's got some carving, sloping around here, so it doesn't need a forearm slope. It's kind of got one built in. It's got some belly relief on the back here, belly carve. It's got a curved thingy joint, neck joint bit, and it is what looks to be a one. Blimey, how many pieces is this? 1, 2, 3, 3-piece body, apparently. 3-piece body, and a mahogany neck, which appears actually to be 1-piece mahogany with rosewood fretboard bird inlays. This is a 24.5 inch scale, so it's a tad shorter scale than a Les Paul, which makes it a tiny bit different to play. Not that I would immediately notice, but overall it's an inch shorter than the Strat scale length. It's fairly simple. It's got 2 volumes, one for neck, one for bridge, and then a tone knob that there's a master tone for both of those. It's got nice PRS style bridge with built-in intonation, and the whole thing is satin finished anyway, but it has a kind of bit of lived-in wear from where Jim's played it. It's got a Tusq or new bone nut on it, which is potentially salvageable. The actions aren't usually high down here, but it's a typical situation where I mean, if you were to look at it, these strings are sitting in massively deep slots which are hindering the tuning. So what we agreed with is that we would go with an adjustable nut, this time on one of my new rock hard plastic bases. So this is sort of pre-cut, pre-molded and done, ready to go. So it'll have a very similar colour, but just with the 2 little grub screws for adjustment. And we'll just get rid of this original one. I'm going to take some measurements or take a close-up picture just to sort of see how how deep those slots really are, because they are problematic really, and it's a shame because there's no real reason why you'd go that deep in the slots. It's only asking for trouble really. See if I can get this to zoom in better. I'll take some measurements of the playing action at either end. It felt nice to play, and I like the sound of the pickups. These are what do they call them? SE245 pickups, a bass and a treble one, as they call them. So it's a very simple guitar, feels good, looks good, and tuners feel quite nice under tension. They don't seem to have too much rattle or anything, which you can get with cheaper versions of these vintage style cloisonne things, but they seem to work really well. Yeah, I mean, this nut has been fairly nicely fitted and rounded off, so it's not sharp or anything, but it's got a funny little dimple up here on the finish. But otherwise, it's a nice guitar, and I think I tuned it to drop D and spent half an hour or a quarter of an hour playing Fat Bottom Girls by Queen for fun, and it sounded great, meaty as heck on a rectifier type channel. Now I've got here I've got a white nut base, and I've got another one ready made with a slightly stained one, so it's got a yellower look, which actually might suit this better. In fact, I've got two ready to go. So here we have, I won't use this nut was this a test one I had used for something? Yeah, I've used that. It's not an in-service one, but we've got a couple of options colour wise. I did some tests the other day. There's one in a kind of old style, I think it was one drop of, oh, what the hell was it called, amber in the mix, amber stain. So we've got a kind of, actually it's quite a fairly nice kind of stain. It's a little darker than the nut itself. And then we've got a half a drop version, if I get the right bit in my hands. I'm looking in the base of these because it's such a clear sort of good match, the moulding. I can read the numbers perfectly. So that's probably the best colour one. It's kind of halfway between the nut and the binding, which is it's kind of fairly similar in hue or tone to that one. And this one's a little bit whiter, although it's it's a good fit. It's more the colour of the nut. So I probably think about that one. I've made these ready to go, and they're ready to cut down to the precise size. What I'll do is I'll just work out one of these little hex keys, because they need to go with the guitar and the nut. So that's my nut for this guitar. I changed, if you've seen me do this before, you know that I've used milliput in the past, which makes a usable nut base, but it was a little bit too soft and fibrous for my liking. I couldn't get milliput hard enough. So, having changed to a mixture, or it's gone somewhere for the time being, called Plast-aid, it worked really well. Okay, so let's do a couple of measurements on here just to see what we're playing with. Like I say, they're pretty good. Now, the beauty of using the adjustable nut is, providing, and they usually do, but providing that Tusq has got their factory settings right, these we shouldn't need to mess with these slots, and that's one of the advantages of that. Now, these are a little bit higher than I would have it, so it's a good thing to be able to do now anyway. Let's go to 55. So first fret about 0.6 mil, which is higher than it needs to be. It's a bit variable, but it's not bad. It's playable, but it could be a little lower. But the beauty of the adjustable nut is you can go to wherever you want. Now we have a quick visual check of the relief. If you want to get fussy, you can put on a capo and get your little whatchamacallits, these things out, and you can measure the relief more technically or more accurately by halfway point, holding down and putting your thingies through there. This is over 0.2. That's 0.25. So it's probably showing a 3, possibly even a 4. I find it pretty difficult to see when it actually moves using that kind of approach. I see people on their channels doing checks with feeler gauges, and somehow they're able to note whether it moves the string or not, and I find that quite a difficult challenge. But we can put on our best zoom glasses, and some people like to put it off there. I'm going to do it from there, and the halfway point is the halfway point between the two, and kind of it's about there. Okay, well, that's a bit higher. That's about 0.4, so it's a fair amount of relief. Jim sent me a video, or YouTube link to a YouTube video of him playing. I'm going to just make a note here. Relief is just over 0.4. Let's call it 0.4, but it's a fraction over. Yeah, Jim sent me a link to a video of him playing, and I could hear he hits the strings quite hard, and it's something I've been trying to ask players to do when they send the guitar, because one of the things that happened over doing this a lot, one of the things I realised I was really bad at doing, and that was knowing the style of play. When I'm out in the shed and I'm playing gently, it's easy to assume or fool yourself that's how everyone plays, or that's even how I play all the time, which is not necessarily true. So what you want to be able to do is to be able to have some idea, ideally, of how the player hits the strings, and the real reason for that is that how hard the player hits is one of the most important. It's like what I call a gross variable. It's one of the biggest, highest input variables into the whole mixture of how you set your action. So, for example, a difference between a gentle, kind of very light player and somebody who really hits it hard is going to trash all the other values. It'll override all the other values. You can be setting very fine limits with your first fret action and your last fret action, but if somebody's hitting the strings really hard, they're going to get string slap, or they're going to get kind of rattle that you wouldn't get normally if you played lighter. So it was great that Jim sent me a video. I could see him play, and actually it didn't sound like there were any problematic notes, nor did it when I played it. Like I say, the only thing was when I came here. So the whole stretch here, which is, surprise surprise, where the neck thickens up and the Les Paul style neck joins the body, and that's often a problematic area. Let's just do a quick visual check of the last fret actions. Now I suspect these are pretty low, in fact the way that I would typically like them, and they are indeed. You know, we've got 1.2 right there on the high E, and actually we're on 1.5, so Jim's already on the sort of target action there. High E 1.2, low E 1.5. So the sort of what I would like is the action, and clearly what he wants it as, because it's set there, it's currently too low and it's choking out. Now the thing that I've mentioned many times before, but I'm just going to run through briefly in case you haven't been on one of those videos with me, is I'll just do it in a bit of space here somewhere. The problem with the let's say an SG neck kind of looks like that from start to finish, because the bulk of the SG neck with the truss rod in it lies outside of the body. All right. With a bolt-on neck, that's where it joins the body, let's say, the bolt-on neck tends to be better, but it has a bit of a stiffening where the neck is bolted to the body. With a Les Paul neck, you've got a curve, then you've got a solid bit, if you like, where the the neck, that's where it's glued to the body, but with all guitars the neck thickens around here, around this point as well, okay, if that's the neck profile. So on a Les Paul you're getting a whole chunk from here in towards the body, where it's not only very thick as an object, but it's also glued to a huge chunk of mahogany, an unyielding chunk of mahogany. with the bolt-on style neck, it's fairly slender up to this point, and it thickens somewhat, but not as much. So you've got a bit of stiffening there and a bit of a plateau. With the SG neck, it tends to thicken right at the end here, so you've got a little bit of stiffening up there, but the bulk of the neck seems to bend pretty usefully. So the Les Paul has this kind of built-in problem. Now, because of that, you can see that you're not getting a smooth curve from beginning to end of your fretboard. You're getting a sort of what I often refer to as a hammer and a sickle. No, a sickle. What am I talking about, comrade? A sickle. So a sickle is a blade which comes up to a handle like that, right? If we think about physics, or a drawing of a sickle you cut the grass with. And so on a sickle, as you can probably see, the kind of crisis area where the real change is most extreme is here. Yeah. If you think about the start and finish end, and let's track the curve, right? Nice curve, curve, nice curve, and then what it really should be is that, yeah, where it goes up to meet the end point. But we've got this crimp, okay, and it's that crimp that historically has caused problems. I mean, obviously it's extremely exaggerated here, but if you think about, let's say you've got your, it's a bit extreme. So you've got your anchor point down here, and you've got your anchor point here, your nut and your bridge. Obviously, people's strings kind of go like that, right? And here you've got a progressive and predictable increase in action around the middle section of the guitar. Okay, where, for example, the relief is 0.4 millimeters. Let's call that 0.4 for fun, right? Down exaggerated part where it's widest. Okay, that's the neck relief. And then, as you can see, the strings, as they come up here, the distance between the string and the frets is kind of predictable. It's decreasing slowly, if you like. But then up here, it suddenly goes around a tight corner, and you've got this very, very tight shrunken distance here, which causes fret buzz. So if you're looking at it practically, and let's say you press the fret down, doink, there, right, and you want to get up to there, well, quite simply, look what happens. That's an extremely exaggerated view, but you can see that if it was on this curve, there would be clearance still up to the bridge. But because the curve is interrupted and folded or crimped, bent, you see that this is clearly hitting the fretboard here at that crisis point. It's extremely exaggerated, but that's what the stiffened end of the neck does. Okay. Now, just before I leave that behind, what a lot of luthiers, I'm told, do, and I just can't quite understand this, there's a thing that people do called fall away, and they let's pretend these are the frets going to the very end, right? What they do is they sort of carve a slope backwards. Apparently it helps. Obviously it helps a lot more than this is over exaggerated. In a more subtle diagram, this process of carving a fall away where you level the frets down so the one behind is a little lower than the one behind is, progressively lower, helps luthiers conventionally somehow get over this this slight hump. I've exaggerated, so it kind of looks ridiculous at this stage, but this fall away is the traditional way of trying to overcome and creating a little bit more space so that the strings continue to vibrate. However, I'll show you what I do, because I've been asked this loads of times and it's quite difficult to explain, but let's take that thing again, right? And let's do our anchor points, fore and aft, and then let's draw in our curve again, and we'll show it as what we do. Yeah, let's go from down here. Right, I'll go kind of down here like this, and okay, and that's where we're trying to do, and you can see there's an interruption. Now, because I level with a radius, a truss rod leveling beam, if I'm drawing the truss rod doesn't, well, it makes a curve between these 3 points. Okay, I mean this is extreme, but it follows more the ideal curve than it does the actual bent curve of the sickle shape, and as a result we level with that blue curve, which is much more like the ideal curve than it is the real curve. And as a result, on a not quite so extreme thing, if I were to flatten this out a bit more and make it kind of look like it really does, as much as I can, let's say there's the end of the curve, goes up like that to there, right? Let's say we've got frets, 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 anchor point. What we do is we're doing the blue curve, and we come along and we do this, right? We just, there you go. It's not a bad sort of diagram. I forget the individual heights, they're all wrong, but the point you're seeing is that to level this hump area with the smooth curve that's in the truss rod just scallops away the intrusion of this area here, and it doesn't do much to these, unlike the fall away method, which seems to take a lot more off. But I found just in practice that leveling with this curve, which of course isn't perfect anyway, none of it's perfect, but it seems to overcome the problem of the fall away without ever having to do any fall away, because this is subtle enough to just iron out that, I call it the knuckle, you know, that sort of between the handle and the blade, this junction point here. Anyway, just in case you're nerdy and interested, I wanted to sort of explain that, because some people get quite grumpy about it and demand to know, why aren't I doing fall away, and how can you possibly level a Les Paul neck because it's got such an odd shape, and don't you know, and yes I do, and it's quite common sense that it's stiffened up here, and there's a limit to how much it will curve, but if you look down it you'll see a generally a curve. Oh look, I've got the heater on and the door's wide open. Let's gently lock oneself in so that one can stay warm. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this, got our measurements. Oh, what we haven't got is a end last fret measurement. This we got, I didn't write it down, but we got 1.2 and 1.5. So first, last fret E, 1.2, last fret low E, 1.5, sort of ideal target. So we're not looking to lower anything at that end. I would suggest we'll make an adjustment at this end when we've placed the new adjustable nut on it. But we do clearly at that setting, we definitely have chokes, which means it's a nice lower playing action for rhythm and stuff, but you cannot use that string for high bends up there. So the treatment plan for this here guitar is pretty simple. It's going to be remove the nut, take the truss rod cover off. I think we could make a tiny adjustment to the first to the neck relief. It's a little bit higher than it technically would need to be, but we don't have to go far. I don't think it needs that too much adjustment. We'll make a very small adjustment there, and then we'll remove the nut, and while we're doing that we'll also take care of the marking up the frets, and we'll take a closer look at them to see what condition they're in. Okay, so we have a where's my where did I put my, is this the one? My little adjuster. It's got a little thingy nut on the end. I think it's not this one. So there we go. It's a little hex socket that's going to be needed, but I don't know if I've got it kicking about. I don't have a custom adjuster. I'm going to have to go off and look for one. So yeah, we'll do that. I'll switch the camera off and I'll get my torch out and go for a search in all my bits and bobs to find one. It'll be, I'll use a very small socket. It'll be, typically you'd use a key, unless it's in the bag. I doubt it somehow. It'd be good if it was, because that would be a useful thing to send down with it, since it's a bespoke object. But I'm not seeing such a thing. Well, there we have it. Alright, I'll go on a search and try and find out where I put all my sockets now. See you in a minute. Okay, that was quicker than I expected. Found the right little adjuster. So I was able to just make a small adjustment, very, very small, and it's very, what's the word, light. It's not a stiff rod to adjust. It's now, the gap now is down to about 0.3, which is half what it was. So I'm going to leave it there because we'll see how it plays. So the next part of this is to remove the nut. Wow, somebody's put some time and effort into fitting this. I don't know exactly if this was the original one, came with the actual guitar, but it's very deeply cut. Hence the issues really with the issues with the binding. And somebody's, I think, has used some various graphite stuff to try and get it and make it smoother. So I'm just going to do the very gentle tappity tap game. This could be quite, feels quite well attached. Okay, I'm just looking, it's on a little ledge, there's paint in front of it, which kind of makes me think that, has that been, has it been sprayed, fitted and then sprayed? It kind of runs up to the base of it, might have been, in which case it'll bend over that paint as it, when it comes off. And there she goes. There she goes. Bit of loosening off. Okay. In this case, it's pulled a bit of rosewood with it, which it does, but that's all. We can flatten that down, and then the adjustable nut will do the rest. Okay, and it will, actually it's hardly, well, not much more adjustment to do, but there will be a little tiny bit to do. Now, while I'm here looking at the condition of the frets, they're pretty good nick. They've got some wear down this end, but nothing spectacular, as you'd expect. So it's been put on with quite a lot of glue. That's the downside of this. So it may have been fitted after market. You can see it's crunchy super glue. I don't know how well you can see this, but those are pretty deep nut slots. And really, if you were, even if you're going to stay with this nut, which is what do they call it? You know, new bone or something, or whatever, Tusq or new bone. Even if you're going to stick with that, and there's no reason not to, then my advice would be to sand all of that down. Somebody suggested on a I think it was a YouTube video, but a person gave a good bit of advice and said the way he does it is to leave the nut on, leave the strings in, and once you've set the slot or the first fret height, file down until you're scraping the tops of the strings from the bass ones down to the treble ones, and then you know you're damaging the strings, but it doesn't matter, they're sacrificial anyway. So you're down to a really good low height. If you do it with the strings out, you sometimes kind of overdo it, and then you end up with the strings, you've already set the basic low point, but you haven't got enough walls to stop the string moving sideways, and that's occasionally what can happen, but that's fine. Like I say, it's no easy way of removing a nut when it's been glued on pretty pretty firmly, I have to say. So now these strings at this point in time are sacrificial strings, so their purpose is going to be for fret leveling and getting the nut right, so we don't have to worry about getting them grubby or dirty or whatever. And so for the purpose of this is we want to lever them out of the way. So I'm going to get some fairly strong, this green tape, which is quite good for holding on to things. And while we're there, we can put a bit of it round and pull it well and truly out of the way. So we just want access to this. I just want to flatten this down and give it a good flat start point. It'll work. This thing would sit on top of it and basically glue would fill the slot, but or the gaps. But I don't want that to happen that way. I would much prefer that it was well and truly out of the way and flat. So we'll do a little bit of sanding work in there. With these, we're currently sitting too high anyway, so rather than cutting down the underside of here, if I take this down a little bit here, this will nestle a bit further down. We might just about be on the right spot when we finish leveling it off. Now, leveling it off is a tricky process. When you do it, the thing you've got to be shorten of doing is you have to make sure that you are doing it flat. What you don't want to do is end up with a downhill slope, because you're at risk of the nuts or wobbling. Now, as it happens, the gaps here are pretty solid, and this nut will sit on here without any tipping or anything. We could just glue that on, but my not OCD, but you know what I mean, for my sense of propriety demands. And one way you can do it to make sure it's straight is to just go in with a blade and just carefully go backwards and forwards up to the line where the paint starts. Now, this is obviously, you've got to be careful with this, and it's a slow old process, but the slower you do it, the better you'll get the finished thing. And so you also importantly want the angle to be dead straight, and this is nicely sanded flat anyway, so I can see this fits beautifully up against there. I don't need to do too much because it's not broke. I don't need to over fix it. But right now that's in good sitting in a good place spot. So I'm just going to gently push that back there so I can get a bit of a run up onto here. And so I'm going to use the blade to scrape down a little bit. Now, the great thing about the adjustable nut anyway, as with any nut I suppose, is that if we end up with a slight overall slope, microscopically I'm talking, then the fact is, with a twist of the grub screw, then you correct it and you won't even notice. So what we don't want to end up doing is over working this bit here. It's just to take away any major sort of lumps of rosewood that could be messing up things sitting down. It's quite clear that it's going to sit firmly at either end and fit in place, and it's beautifully sized and it's pretty much spot on. It's not easy to get them absolutely right in advance. The Tusq nut is often the Tusq nut adjustable insert can often be slightly smaller than some Les Paul or single cut type guitars, and there isn't a lot you can do about that because Tusq don't make versions of it for different guitars which accommodate for that extra mil or half a mil that you might find being at issue. But it's pretty close, and for my opinion on it, the playability improvement or the tuning improvement is well worth the tiny difference in size you might get. Now, this is kind of nearly workable. I'm not sure I want to take much more down, even though technically on this we could go down a fair bit more, because there's a fair kind of a couple of little troughs where the rosewood's pulled away. But the more we work on this, the more likely there's going to be introduce some unevenness. The beauty about working with this as is and working from the underside of the nut now to do the final tweaking is because as long as we know this sits beautifully firmly in place, we're happy with that, then we can use the sanding block to work this very carefully down to the exact right height that we want. And the nice thing about this is it's quite, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to undo these now because I need them back for a minute. But the nice thing about this is you can use the strings to tell you exactly when you've got to where you need to get to. The trouble about this green stuff is it's very useful tape, but it sometimes doesn't want to come off. Thank you. Now the thing with a Tusq nut, there's only one other thing to really know, and that is the Tusq nut. Even when we fit the base to here, the Tusq nut, this is actually quite tight fitting, but the Tusq nut itself is never attached. It's just sitting there under force of the strings. So we line up and basically nail down the whole thing as a unit, right? And we place that and glue it. And then once we've done it and told it where we want to fix it like that, then obviously the first thing is that the height's going to be all wrong, so we'll get that no, I'm talking about we'll check it first by putting a little pressure on, but because it's free to move, and right now the whole thing's free to move, but generally speaking when you change strings, the nut, the adjustable part, is still free to move, so you want to tighten up the middles first. If you tighten up the end first, it will flip off. So I just need to put it under, I'm in the wrong slot, I want to put it under enough tension to sit it firmly down, but to get a clear sense of how much we are above the first fret. Now you might think this runs a risk of, you might have to be really perfect with this. You don't, because that's the beauty of having the adjustable part of it. What we're looking to do here is, with the screws completely undone, or which they are right now, so we want to start, in setting this, I'm starting with the top part, the adjustable part, sat flat on the base, right? And now I'm looking to see what's the height over the first fret when everything's a bit done up. It doesn't have to be under full tension because we still need to get the nut off. Now it's clearly quite a chunk off. It's a couple of millimeters off. Now that means that we're going to need to take off that much from the underside. Okay, if we want to, we could measure it and get a sort of clear idea of it. We want to be really precise. Let's add up what we got here. That's 70, 95, 110. Can't even read these anymore. How can I read that? 110 plus 50, 160. That's got to be, is it 20? Yeah, 160, 170, 180. Let's call it 180. I might be guessing, but we could test it with this thing if we don't trust it. Okay, well it says 195, and that actually is right because the whole thing should add up to 2, I think. So 195, right, is I've got a handful of 195 here. So if we look at this, we see, okay, it's not 195, that's for sure. So let's take off, that will be, oh, I lost the measurements here, that will be, what did we say, 195, 185, 170, let's try 170. That's right, it's a bit fiddly this. Just getting I want to get a rough idea of what I've got to take off the base, okay? So, not quite, 170. Let's take off the 20. That doesn't make sense, that isn't. So that's 70. 50. Is that 50 or 60? I've got such an old set here that I can't darn well read them. Right, I can't read them. It's official. I actually can't read them. That's got to be, surely it's 50. 130. Let's go 155. That's no good. Let's take away. Let's go 70. That's 50. Let's go 120. 1 mils 20. Okay, 1 mils 20 takes us to just above the fret, and this end a bit more. Let's call it 120. Okay, so let's take these off a minute. So we know we've got to take 120 off the underside of this nut base. Now I can measure that and mark it, which will kind of give me a start point. So what did we say? 120. 0. 120. That doesn't sound like a lot. It's not. It's quite precise, so it's quite hard to work to such a small amount, but it's kind of useful to have a guideline figure. I suspect this is going to line exactly up with that mark there, which it almost perfectly is. So there's me 120. Now I'm going to run a straight line along here, and we're going to just hedge on the side of conservative so it's not too much one way or t'other. And this is in a permanent marker here that I'm doing this. So that's a good indication of where I've got to get to make this fit. I mean, you can see what you've got here is you've got a tall nut, but you've actually got a long penetration of the slots. So the actual, come to this side, the actual slot bottom to underside here is 629 on the was that the treble side, and we're going to go for almost exactly that here. We want it slightly lower because that one was, what was it, 0.6 above the thing. We want this one to rest, the strings to rest on the fret, because we want to use the adjustability part of it, and there's no point setting it above the fret because then we're not using the adjustability. So I've got to, importantly, I've got to sand this down. But I've got to do it in a way that it stays square along the sanding. So I want it to cut down evenly, and the guideline that we're working to is the underside of the adjustable nut, because it's a sloped nut, so the underside is the guide, and we need the bottom to be parallel to that, and then also down to the line. Now this is very strong plastic, so it's not going to happen quickly, whereas the previous Millicut material would have cut much faster than this. But in a way this has its benefits in that it doesn't run a great risk of overcutting, because it's working much more slowly. So as we get closer to the line, I'm looking for that edge, and I want it to stay parallel. So if I feel like it's running off the vertical, then I'll just put a little bit of, in this case, forward pressure to bring that line back in line with the underside of the adjustable nut. Now it's actually feeling like it's a little bit unevenly cutting end to end, so I'm going to put a little bit more emphasis on the right hand, or it's the base end in this case, and again it's just about double checking that the way it's sitting, and just keeping it as square and as flat as we can possibly make it. And then when we get down to the line, I can see it's almost on the line now. We're still checking the flatness or the parallelness, and then when we feel that we're really close to it, I'm switching to the lighter gauge off the sandpaper, and you come down from there. And again, this reduces the speed at which it does its work because it's a finer grade. We should be able to get there without any risk of losing the parallelness. Now, what we'll find then is when we put a string back in, we'll go for a central one. We've still got some room to go. Hey, and these should fit because although they're heavy gauge, they should be sitting comfortably in the slots. This nut should quite comfortably accommodate. Okay, so we've still got a bit more. So I was working conservatively. If we were to look at the gap that's left here now, probably find it's about 40, a bit more. So we've got a little bit more to do. So I was going very much on the safe side of things there. Okay, 0.5. Can still take 0.5 of a mil. We'll just double check it on this side. The nice thing is if we go over, it's not a problem because we just raise it up with the grub screw. But I'd like to be as close as possible starting out. That's the nice part. Okay, comfortably drop another 0.5 and be safe. So I could either mark a 0.5, which I'm going to see if it makes any sense at all. It's probably only just enough to draw the thickness of a pen line. Let's see what we can do. This is when you suddenly realise you want one of those, what they used to call them, rotring pens, do you remember? See, I haven't cut to the line on this yet, which is probably why we're not quite there. Alright, let's just let's go to the line like we intended. Yeah, you remember those rotring kind of precise engineering drawing ink pens? Used to crave those when I was a young artist in my day. Again, this has still got quite a bit of room to go. Like I say, it is good because you don't have to fear over cutting because you've got that upwards movement possible with the grub screws, which of course is what they're designed for. That's what the whole purpose of this unit is. Okay, so basically I'm just going to go until the strings at full, the thing sitting right down until this string touches the fret. It's still a little bit off, so it's quite a nice marker, and it's just about going patiently and not going too crazy, and finding yourself having to correct a swerve or an angle that's changing, so you're getting the wrong tilt. What you don't want is to get the angle wrong and end up with the nut sitting flat. The nut's designed to sit backwards towards the tuners like that. It's got a little sort of wedge shaped top, and for it to sit like that, it depends on this base being dead flat to the nut, which we'll get to. So let's just, so as you get closer, you can fine tune the angles and make sure it all works perfectly. So that's nearly touching the first fret, but we'll stick to our guns and we'll make it touch so that it's starting out where I wanted it. There's plenty of range in the whole thing for adjusting upwards, so as long as you just start by touching the fret, you can't go wrong. You won't run out of upwards adjustment. If you go too far, of course, you might end up running out of adjustment. It is possible, so it's a case of going down with it at this sort of pace. Okay, so I'm going to settle that one in there and that one on there, and we'll tighten those up. That's almost touching the fret. I mean, we could go with that and still do a tiny upward adjustment to get it right, but I want to start touching the metal because that was the plan. So we're nearly there, and I'm just now doing the fine side of things, and tend to move my body rather than the hands, because that allows me to keep the angle as smooth as it was before. I'm just going to do the front and take off the little burr. And I'll just do the back as well for the same reason, and then a bit more on the base. Okay, so that is pretty much right on. And so what you'll start with is, falls right, we'll tighten these up and we'll be, that's good. It's just kissing the fret. For me that's fine. It's, that one's, oh go on, no, go on, let's do it a tiny bit more, come on. We're going to start with touching the fret. Let's do exactly what we said, we're very nearly there anyway. Okay, so I think it will be a very small matter, a tiny bit more. Check the angles, that's the most important bit. Nice flat bottom. That's okay. If anything, that's just about right. Okay, so I'm going to call that the right size. Now while I'm at it, while we're at it with this, I'm going to mark off the frets for fret leveling. Now most of these won't need fret leveling. We're not really having to worry about high frets choking off play or causing buzz on any playing notes, but what we're looking for is to clear away the obstructions to the bends. Now sometimes you have to compromise. If you have a very tight radius, for example, like on a vintage Strat, sometimes the geometry just makes it impossible. No matter how much you level your frets, you literally cannot get bends on high notes, high E bends, from a certain tight radius on an action below a certain level. It's just the geometry limits it and you can't do it. And you need to know that so you don't spend time endlessly trying to level your way out of it, because you won't. On a guitar like this, where I couldn't remember seeing what the radius was, but it looks more like a 12-inch radius. A guitar like this, you'd expect to be able to level and free up those notes. And we'll see. Now for this point in time, I'm not even sticking the adjustable nut in. I'm just placing it and letting it, gravity or force of the strings, pull it down. Okay, and then seeing where it lines up. It's nicely spaced. Everything looks good. Now if we go to get just a basic. Oh, I'm flat. Thank you. How did I know that? That's quite good. Now that tells me it's already on the deck, so there's no point starting on the deck. I mean, we need it there for playing. You know, we need to be able to start with it on the deck, but then we need to be able to wind it up and set a decent action. So I'll wind it up a bit until I get the A. Beautiful. Now we have an action just by chance, which happens to be a smidgen over 0.3, which is kind of where I'd like it, and that's it in place. Okay, not going to adjust it any further. I'm just going to pull the strings a little bit to bed them in before we do the fret leveling. Because when you're at level, you do want the guitar at pitch, because you want the neck bending as it would when you're playing. So there we have it. A bit dusty, and we'll clean it up later on. There's our replaced nut. Now what I'm looking at here, just looking, the low E is a big string and it's sitting quite high out of the slot, but actually it's fine, it's not going anywhere, it's no chance of pushing out of place, so I'm not worried about it. The rest of them, as you heard, all those notes tuned up without any pinging or dragging. The tuning was linear, there was no sort of dead spots or anything, so I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to turn the heater off, it's warm in here. I'm going to get the department of fret leveling down, and pardon me, I'm going to level out the top part. Now the thing about the fret leveling process is it's a really cool diagnostic. So before you level your frets, you need to just double check, have I got my nut set the way I want? Yes. Have I got the action down here set? It was set perfectly. It'll have dropped a tiny fraction because we've lowered this, but not so much that you'd probably even be able to register it, given that the nut reduction is a tiny component. It does take this down to, I can't see very well, that's just a smidge over 1. That's very low. So you know, we may not be able to free those up. Now so you check your things. Last fret action, okay, it's just about right. First fret is good. Relief is a tiny bit less than we had it before, which is good. Am I ready to level? Yes. Bearing in mind that now is a tiny fraction lower than even I would aim for it. So I'm going to set out at that, but we may need to crank that back to the target that I would normally go for, because there's no point, unless it automatically or easily complies, there's no point trying to get a lower action than you would normally get. On an SG, possibly 1mm at the last fret on the high E. On a Les Paul, usually if you're getting 1.25, you're doing well because of this business here. On a 9.5 or 7.5 inch radius Strat, forget it, 1.5 or 1.75. 9.5 inch, you know, 1.25 or 1.2. 12 inch Strat, 1.21 if you're lucky. But so the thing to just keep in mind, right, we know that, well, I didn't show you, but I know that all the notes on here play cleanly. There's nothing that's choking in and of itself, so there are no immediately high frets. What there is on the low action this is set at, we know that as we bend this across, right, it's choking out here. And the reason for that is that if you think about, if you look at it as 2 dimensions, we're just going kind of into triangle, right? Bend point down to the anchor point, it's a triangle. In 3 dimensions, right, you've got a start point that's down here. If you think about the neck and the nut and the bridge together, they're all curved, right? So you're starting down here on the E's nut, and then normally it runs all the way up here in the same single dimension up to the E's bridge anchor point. And when you're bending it, you're bending about right up the top, and you're bending this way, right? Now flat on, it's a triangle. In 3 dimensions, you're bending it that way, but you're also bending it up the hill over the top of this radius. So that means that when you're at the top of the hill with your bent E, the anchor point is down there, right, which is out, it doesn't matter, but the anchor point at this end is down here, and it's lower than this. So any fret in front of it is going to get in the way, because the physical anchor point is down at the bottom of the hill again, right? Now there has to be a certain minimum clearance for the guitar to be able to play if you're going up that hill and down again in this 3-dimensional picture, right? It's possible sometimes that by leveling the frets you get freed up and you can just get away with it. It may be that to bend up that hill and back down again, or to have a clearance when the string's clearly going back downwards in 3 dimensions, then it may be that you have to raise that end up a little bit so it clears these next frets. So the thing you'll see me worrying about is that really I'm only concerned, as I bend here, I'm only concerned with what I call the track, where the choking starts and finishes. So you can see right at the apex of the hill, the curved fret, it's choked out. And it means that in attempting to go back downhill to this anchor point here, the downward movement of the string in 3D is causing it to bang against this fret here. Now, below a certain physical height of this setting here, you can't do it, right? You have to have a certain amount to overcome this downward. And smart people will realize that if the curve is even greater, then the more clearance you're going to need because you're going further up a hill. That's what I mean by the limitations of the geometry. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be gently leveling, and I'm going to be concentrating on the B track and the G track, which is where if we achieve anything, you're going to hear this pre-up. So let's take a bend note, so 12, 13, 14, 15, right? 15, the bird on 15 is our start point. We know here it's starting to zing somewhere around what would typically be the G track. By the time we're across the G track towards the D, we're choking because we're starting to come down the hill, and you're going now, the string has to go over the top of the hill, so it has to go back up and over. It's going to get obstructed by the following fret. It's logical, right? But hear that bend on the 15th. Let's see if we can free it up. Now what this very gentle fret leveling, starting out knowing what you're trying to achieve when you're fret leveling, is pretty important, because you're not going to just keep bashing away until something terrible happens, right? I'm using 400 grit paper on here. It's quite old paper, so it's not going to be cutting like it's fresh even. And what I'm looking for is to mimic the curve on this neck by using these three little doofus dots, or whatever they are, equally sized brass things. Nuts. Now, once I've made sure that the rod is following the curve, right, between those 3 points, mind you, so it's ignoring this bit in the middle, it's following an ideal curve between these 3 points, ignoring the congestion. Now I've got that ideal curve, I place it on here, and I start to just go up and down in what I call the E track. And pretty much to begin with, I'm just using gravity, right? What I'm looking for is I'm looking to see exactly what happens to the frets as I go up and down with this 400 grit sandpaper. Now, the beauty of this is that if we're lucky, it will just tidy up some of the wear down here as a side benefit. It's not the reason I go about doing it. Now, the first thing I can tell you is we've got some cutting here, a little bit there, a little bit more there, none there, tiny bit there, some more there, none there, a little bit, hardly any, some, none, tiny bit, quite a 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 bit. And what you see is that despite there being some patches, it's cutting in all parts of the neck, which means I've got the neck mapping pretty much right. Where it's not cutting, what you're seeing is effectively some low frets in this sequence. Now, below the action that we've set, we don't care about what unevenness there is. We only care about it insofar as it impacts on the action we've set. So the nice thing about this method is we're only leveling for the action we've set, and as in this case it's pretty damn low. So but it means that you're not going for an absolute arbitrary levelness, which is what you are doing when you're using your fret rocker and a traditional file. You're going for an absolute levelness. Now, looking up here, and I'm seeing what we've probably got here is a couple of low frets. Now that, regardless of this business of the geometry of pushing the string uphill and it going back down to a lower anchor point, if you've got a low fret in the mix, or one or two low frets, they make the next frets high. So the whole lot could be nicely balanced with two low frets. And as soon as you're in that dip, right, the one after that's going to feel high and it's going to choke out. So this can be all slightly messed up by the existence of low frets, and often most necks have them, but your hope is that they're not too severe, and usually they're not. So I'm expecting all notes to play at this point in time, which they do. It doesn't need any more leveling to make notes play at this action. What it won't have done, cured that, because the congestion is as we bend up into the what I call the B and the G tracks. So really I'm kind of doing this bit at this point in the game just to kind of diagnose the rest of the neck and the state of it, and also while I'm at it clear up these little wear patches down here from playing chords. I've said to folks before, I would never go after that as a goal in itself, because I don't think it's important enough to exchange for fret metal, right? Since fret metal is the life of your guitar, you'd only do that when those are seriously impacting or affecting the way the guitar plays, and they almost never do. Brian May on his old Red Special has got these incredible grooves, and to be honest, it doesn't seem to affect him. He says it doesn't affect him at all, and I take his word for it. I don't like the look of it, but he says it's no hindrance. So we're almost getting a tone out of it. Again, the problem isn't really in the B channel, or the B track I should say, and every note in that track is fine. And here's where we get to the challenge, and we'll know pretty soon if we can't make any difference. If we can't make any difference, then we will need to do a slight raise here. And remember, the action we've chosen on this is unusually low now because of the reduction we've made at the nut. We go back up to the 1.2 that Jim had it at originally because of the balance of the nut. These things are obviously interdependent, right? So if we can't make this play, I'll tell fairly soon using this method, and then I will stop. I will cease trying to level it to get that note freed up, and I will go for a small bridge adjustment back to a more realistic action. But I always like to go a bit under the level and see what it will do. You never know. Now, one of the things I explained to Felix, who bought my ebook and was asking me questions about this, and he was finding it a little bit difficult to know if he was doing the right thing following the method. And one of the things I said is that a thing like that, where you have either an obviously choked note, or in this case a choked bend, is a really good thing to start out with when you're practicing this method, because it's the best way to know what's happening, because with this method, unlike any other method, it's the only way you're going to be able to hear and feel the improvement, and that will tell you, that's direct feedback about what you're doing right or wrong. Now what I'm just doing now is I'm just going over the remains of the B track and into the G track fairly thoroughly, because we know that it's a bit of a congestion. We're going to start here, and I can see a couple of high frets here, so you never know, we might actually, even though it's very low, we might get this free up. And what you're hearing, if it works, you will hear straight. Okay, it's got a tone now without cutting it out. Okay, now it's cutting out there because I think we're in a dip there in the frets. So you see that you can hear. That's why I was saying to him, that's why it's a really good method compared to other methods where you take the strings off, you flatten the neck, and you scrape up and down. This way you can hear exactly what you're improving. So I'm going to just recalibrate for this track. I keep doing it each time, and you'll notice I didn't do it for the second one because it's essentially the same as the first one, and I'm going to recalibrate. Now this has lost its curve a little bit, and I'm just going to go and tweak it again. It can lose its curve while you're handling it. It's very, very sensitive, and I want it to be spot on like that. I'm going to go back into the G track, and I'm going to concentrate now. It sounds a bit subjective, but I'm going to concentrate on this end here where we know we've got the chokes happening on the bends, right? And I'm just going to spend a little extra time now with this problem area. Now this, you could say this is my equivalent of what people do when they do a fall away. I'm just ironing out trying to iron out any remaining issues at this end. Now that is a bit more effort, but the amount it's taking off is tiny compared to, when it's polished out, you'll not notice that it's been leveled. It'll be indistinguishable. But we go to the 15th. Tone and a half, just about. So you can see that's it's gone from not bending at all to bending nearly a tone to bending a tone to bending a tone and a half on an incredibly low action. That's better than I would have expected, because that is absolutely low as anything. That's barely a hair's width over a millimetre. Now I'm only concentrating on the high E because that's the one that gets choked out. Now we've got a low spot here. Now we've improved. We've improved it a little bit, but it's still not perfect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more little bit of leveling on there and see where we get to. If it doesn't free up to and it's that there's a little slight dead spot down in here. Now if we can't free that up, and remember the challenge is you can hear we're clearing up that bend that we didn't have before, but 2 frets up we're in a ditch, and that's basically meaning the following fret is a high one, and it's cutting out, it's getting in the way again as we're doing the bends. So it's a kind of combination of what's already high, when there's a low one that makes the next one high, plus bending across against the geometry and all those constraints. So it's quite a complicated little thing, but we'll get as far as we can with leveling, and this, I suppose the experience and skill is knowing when to stop and saying, okay, look, this is a millimetre, it's a bit adventurous, we can't really get much better than this, let's make the tiniest of adjustments on the action. And that's to say, let's make that adjustment instead of trading off any more fret metal. And I think that, the experience part comes in where you've taken a comfortable amount of metal, you're happy with that, but you don't want to go any further because it's not going to, it'd be, what do they call it, diminishing returns. Okay, so we're getting close. We're getting about a tone out of it before it dies. Now, this is the cool part. Let's imagine we take this, we dial out a 1/2 mil. No, not even 1/2 mil. Let's see where we get to. We were on 1 before. Now that's, can't see very well. That's 1.25, right? Now what you'll hear is 15. Right, well, it can't go past the top of the hill. That's the problem with this. But for a tiny upward adjustment, it's barely perceptible in terms of the action. So we're down to what I would set as the normal beginning action. We're at 1.2. God, if that 1.25, halfway. I don't like that. What I can do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a tiny bit more on the B and the G, and this time I'm only going to concentrate on the final 2 frets because I've hardly taken any material in terms of leveling, so I'm not worried about that. I'm just going to, I've gone back to the B track and I'm going to bend this to shape again, just tweak it or recalibrate as I call it. Again, it's so sensitive that's now over curved. I'll just go back to the exact amount, and now this time all I'm going to concentrate on is the last 4 frets. So by that what I actually mean is I'm going to just press a little heavier there, and again this is touchy-feely bit. I'm going to impose a little bit of fake fall away or downward pressure on there, because I know that there's a slight problem still remaining there. So just come back to my B track, and I'm now just letting this hardly move. I'm just putting some pressure now on these last frets and letting that take away whatever's hopefully getting in the way. Now remember that the bend choking off is going in a linear fashion across. It's not going in one strip and then the next. So if you do one strip and then leave a high bit and do the next strip, you'll have a bump in the middle, and it may well cause you to choke out. So I'm sort of going between them to make sure I kind of cover a linear sort of coverage of the tracks, if you get what I mean. So there is a lot of experience comes into play in this, and when I talk to people about it, you know, particularly people who bought my fabulous $24.99 ebook, I say to them, you know, don't start doing this for the first time on a guitar that you really care about, and because you'll be far too nervous and it'll make you make mistakes and you won't learn from it what you really should be and could be learning. So what I suggest is you get an old guitar, is all you can afford. Get an old guitar and learn on that. Okay, so there you go. All notes playing a little tiny bit. All that's left now is a little bit of zzz as you bend. But if you were so I'm going to stop there. So the thing is, right, it might not seem like much, but if you were to go back, if you could be bothered, and I don't blame you if you couldn't, but if you were to go back to the beginning of this video, you would hear straight away that there were no bendable notes there at all. Right, so we have actually made quite a difference in doing that. It's slow and it sort of happens a little bit progressively as we're doing it. And before you know it, we've got bends back. Now, when I come to, oh, well, I just done that. I haven't followed on. Oh, I jumped ahead and decided I was done. What I will do, as I always like to do, is to follow through with a light leveling of the other strings, even if they're not part of the problem. But I was rushing. But yeah, so you'll see the difference between them, and the start and that, and that's how good I think the method is, because you can actually see and hear the difference, which you otherwise you wouldn't be able to tell. And certainly you wouldn't be able to tell with that much subtlety if you were using the leveling beam method with the neck flat and unstrung. Now I'm not going to worry too much about these. I'm just going to give them a quick check over to play, because I'm not likely to bend across into that track. You see, it's quite a filthy business, but it's very effective. Now with this, you can make adjustments with the nut in the future with this nut, which is why I like it. If you were to prefer to go higher, let's say your playing style, you're getting fret slap on the first frets and you wanted to raise the nut, you can do it. If you changed the gauge of strings and you felt that you wanted to set it up slightly differently, the nut allows you to do that too. And for me, the best reason for using it is that because it's Tusq, it's kind of has got great lubricated properties, and because we're using the screws to push it to the correct height instead of cutting downwards to get the correct height, then we're not messing with the factory slots. And to be honest, no matter how carefully and expertly you cut the nut slots, when you do it by hand, you will always create more friction and unevenness than with the factory slots cut by a machine, as in the Graphtec factory. So great to be able to just kick off with this, with its original slots. Now you see there's a little tiny bit of zing up there, so I am going to pay a little bit more attention since we've been doing it and since we're here. Again, this is a very low action at this end as well. Now it's below the 1.5 mark, which is pretty extreme considering, so I think we've got a fabulous action out of it. But I'll just concentrate on this end here for a second or two, just to see if we can, you know, clear up that little tiny residual buzz on plucking the notes. Now I'm just I'm just putting a little bit more effort into this last patch of frets, and let's see if it changes the way they sound when we play them. One of the things I learned a while back is to, there you go, that's done that. That's the beauty of this method, you can hear it. You would never know. When you do it with the other methods, the strings off and the neck straight, you're aiming for level using your fret rocker, and then you're going to restring everything, or you're going to crown your frets, you're going to restring everything, and then you're going to tighten it all up, and you're going to hope that it all plays nicely. And if it doesn't, you have to go back and do some more leveling in the hope that it's going in the right direction. Whereas this way, you know it's going in the right direction because you just double checked it in real time. And that's what I like about it. That's why I think it's the future. One day in 1970, we will all be leveling frets this way. Right, I declare myself happy with that levelings. Now, what's going to happen is, as I take these strings off, the nut is going to go ping and disappear. So what I'm aiming to do is I just want to visually check, double check where this thing is seating, so that I can make sure that we get it back there. Now there's a slight, to be in the right spot, there's a very slight inset on this side. I'm cool with that. That's the price you pay for fitting this nut. As I said, the nut itself is not quite as wide as some bound Les Pauls like this one, or Les Paul single cuts, whatever. So, but it's not like it's getting in the way. It's a slight step in that direction. This one on this side, it happens to be pretty much nearly flush. On this side, it's a tiny step back. Now I'm just kind of making a mental note of that, because what I want to do next is I want to glue the base in place, baby. And to do that, I'm going to need some tension in these cables, but not much. So, oh, that's interesting. So that's the way it's worked. I see. Ah. Okay, this is an interesting one. This has actually gone through the base. So I think maybe what I did was I made that, started out with the impressions fraction too deep. When I made these molds, because I want the thing to not slide sideways, I kind of made an impression. You can see that I started out with the grub screws out to make a little anchoring impression, and actually what happens is, in this case, it's gone through the plastic at the bottom and it's sitting on the wood underneath, which is not actually a problem, but it's not quite what I intended. But actually what it's just made me realise is what I don't want to be really doing is I don't want to be leaving an impression at all, and the reason for that is it doesn't actually need it, because it's the little in this nice perfect little mould, it's the little well, the walls of it that hold it in place, I should say. So this has actually gone through onto the rosewood. It doesn't really matter. It will compress it very slightly. But then you just raise it, and I've done it with all of mine, and they don't change over time, so it's not a problem. I think unless I make another one complete from scratch, we'll be in the same situation. So let me just think to myself. Let's just put these back on and see how this feels. I might make one more. I've got the material to make one more, and I might experiment with making one without the little guide lugs, and see how we get on. So I guess I'm just wondering. Let me just. I'm just going to do something. There's a thing perhaps do for the next one. Just learning as I go, by the way. One of the things that helps to stabilize this is to just flatten out the little grub screw base, and I forgot to do that on these as well. So you start, we've got a little sort of, I don't know what you call it, dimpled end matron, and it kind of probably acts a little bit like a cutter if you're not careful. So on this one I'm just taking that down flat, so it gets rid of the cutting edge. Okay, that gives me a flatter footprint. So let's just put these back on and have a feel of how it all works. Now, if necessary, I will, if I'm not happy with it, I'll make another one. And this time I'll make it without any, you know, whatever that thing is, dimples. Because I was putting those little dents in to stabilise it, so it couldn't move sideways, but actually it can't move sideways anyway. I'm also trying to design one for the strats. I've used them a lot with, I've made my own out of bone and used them on strats, but the on the strats they always sit on the wood anyway, and that's quite sort of interesting because yeah, they seem to work okay. Now I'm just looking down here. Let's have a look at this. Okay, a bit of a detour, diversion. Anyway, it's kind of irrelevant to the levelling part. That's done. I'm just trying to make sure as this sits inside the paint ridge, which I think I'd just put it on top of it there instead of inside it. So it won't be an issue once it's stuck down anyway. So just for now, when they've finished the headstock, they spray up to the base of the nut, and it kind of forms a little wave. Come right to the front. Okay. Now this is going to press down on the frets again, probably. No, it's not. So this is now. It's on one of them anyway. Okay, so just out of interest, that one's sticking up a bit. Let's make it down. Right. Right. Okay. Let's put a bit of height into it now. Let's put a bit of height into it now at this end. Get a note. Okay. You see, it's lifting the whole thing on its little feet versus that bit. Yeah, maybe I'll make another one and just this time flatten the things off and not put the little dimples in it anyway, because it doesn't need them. That way I'm sort of disappearing the support base, or making it marginal thickness by the time we've sanded upwards. Okay, I might make one. So what I want to do first, I'm just going to widen this one so that's getting in the way. Where's the writing? I can't see any reflection. Thank you. There's the number. There's the number. Put it in. Put it in. So I can see the footprint now of the nut coming through onto there. Yeah, I'm going to experiment with one for the strats where I'm going to try and build into it a little strip of brass, but I don't know how reasonably easy that's going to be. Funny thing, this hasn't been a problem with the milliput ones. Okay, so now I've given myself a bit of clearance. Start by winding this one up. That should fit straight the way through. I'll just push, so it's pushing the base up as well, which is not what I wanted. Okay, I think I will make another one shortly. Yeah, it's treating the whole thing as a single unit now, which is kind of to be expected. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the camera off and I'm going to make another one slightly differently. Right, that's okay for now. I'm going to clean up and make another one, this time without. I should have thought of the bottom of the scrub screws. They're like little screws, drills. If you don't round or flatten off the part of the feet they stand on. So anyway, I'll do that, and this time we'll make one that they stand on the plastic, not in little dents, because they don't need to. That was trying to be too clever. All right, so I'll see you when that's done. And in fact, the leveling's done. What I'll do in between off camera is I'm going to, I know what I've got to do with that. I'll just, the fret leveling's done. In fact, let's I probably ideally still need the strings around, but let me show you briefly what I will do. I know Jim wanted a video of this, so I don't want to leave anything off. The thing I tend to leave off camera is the polishing part, which takes forever. So what I'm going to do is take that off. I will re-profile the leveled frets. That's an important stage. And that takes any flat spots that you've made and just gently reshapes them so that they're rounded or arch shaped again, and that's really important. Well, it's important for the precise intonation to be at the very top of the fret rather than at the front edge of a flat spot. So it's a pretty simple thing. I've got a Tusq tool that I've been using for the last 4 or 5 years nearly, so it's a very effective old tool. Not cheap, but worth its money. And then once I've done that, I will I'll mask off the neck and polish out all the frets with 3 different grades of sandpaper, and then a load of micro mesh, and then we'll come back, and the only other thing to finish doing will be to remake the nut base. What I might also look to do here is level this out, because actually it doesn't. That's partly where it didn't help having little gaps, because it wasn't strong enough, and I think the gaps kind of buckled when I put this under a lot of pressure. So I'll take care of that as well, but I'll just show you the fret reprofiling process using the old Tusq tool, and I'm just taking the shoulders off the frets. How quick you can do this tends to be a good indicator of how much or how little fret material you took off in the leveling process, and you spend a little bit longer on the frets that you took more metal off than the ones you didn't. It's a very useful tool. You can do it manually with a 3-sided file, but it's a longer process, and it's actually quite satisfying too. But you know, when you do loads of setups, this is a good time saver, well worth the money I paid for it. And normally I don't do this with the strings on, but I'm doing it on just in case I need those while I'm remaking another adjustable nut. Yeah, I think the combination of digging the grub screws into the material, followed by those slight gaps in the substance there, didn't help. So I think I'll just tidy both of those things up, or sort both of those things out. I've got a couple of other nuts here that I could use as well. But I want to make another one because I've got somebody coming for one on their guitar tomorrow, so I want to get that bit done. Working up here, I'm always taking care with the tools right at this end, because you don't have a lot of clearance as far as the finish here is concerned, so you've got to be very careful in controlling the tool so it doesn't run off. You see, it's taking a bit of material. It'll take a little time to reshape that one there, because I took a bit off there to level it down. I was in the process of making those bends play. Okay, that's that done. So the rest will be sanding out, but I will park that job for a minute while we just sort out another nut. Okay, so I think this will be, might be delayed just slightly. I'm going to hang her up. Oh no, I'll tell you what, I'll do it off camera. I'm just going to sort out this. So I'll go back to some careful work here. I'll get the strings out of the way. Okay, I'll probably bump this off for another day so I don't have to rush tomorrow. I want to take my time to get this where I want it to be. Okay, slack off please. No, this isn't working. I say it's not working. first thing, slack off. Slag off. Come on. Yeah, that was not a good idea to leave that uneven, because that's what kind of made things a little bit weaker, because it's pushing on a hollow spot really. I'm going to just tuck that away over there. Tuck these away. Again, these are going to be thrown away, so we don't care about these strings too much. They're just getting them out of the way so we can do other things. Okay, I'll sort this out and see you in a bit. Hello, hello. Welcome back on another rainy evening in the same season of rainy Christmas. So I finished up last night and just left this overnight just to see how it would seat and feel, and actually it seated and feels fine to me. Meantime, I was playing around today making some more. I've ordered some more material anyway, but one of the things I thought I'd try and do is add a little bit of metal in the bottom of there. I've ordered some different materials, some mild steel, some white polypropylene and so forth and so on, and I'm just looking to figure out ways of adding a bit more strength into this thing. But this one actually seated really nicely. So what I'm going to do is I am going to remove the old strings off this now. I'm basically just going to, oops, let's do the middle ones. Sequence, remember. Take the pressure off the middle first and work outwards. And just stop the nut going flying. No, what am I talking about? It's the other way around. It's, oh God. Release the middle ones first. No, release the outer ones first and the middle ones last. And then put the middle ones on first when you come to put it back together again. Anyway, so here we have the old original 11s, and we're taking them off. I'm just going to give this a little clean down now as well. Once this is go the right way, once this is off, these strings are off. And then we'll have it packed up and ready to go tomorrow morning. I was going to go this morning, but it didn't happen because of the lateness. I ran yesterday adjusting the nuts here. So we'll take that off. These have done their service, so I'm going to just cut them off and bin them. So we're kind of cutting off the curly ends, which always get in the way. Powerful enough clippers to do two at once, thankfully. And we'll tie these up, and then we'll put a new set of 11s on. But I'll give this a little, yeah, it's got dusty from the nut work, so I'll give it a little clean down. I'll send back the original nut as well, just in case, Jim, you ever want to put it back on. It's no problem to have it. It will be, well, I was going to say it'd be a fraction lower now, since I've cleaned up the bits of rosewood that come chipped off as it came off, so the little kind of shards. Only a function of having so much glue attached to it, really. It's just the way it is. So now's the chance to give this a clean over. So the first thing I'll do is I will clean it with, clean the fingerboard with some solvent, and then we'll add some, what's it, back on, oil. So in part this is quite a good way of just making sure that the any marker pen that you used for fret leveling is removed as well. Just a little bit of a clean on that. So we have the oil lives here. We have a rag, actually not that one. We'll use some thingamajig, some other thingamajig. So this is the cleaning rag, which is nice and clean still. I'll take care of the headstock as well, which has got dusty. So just to run through everywhere to get any grime off that was in the process of fret leveling. Now this will possibly adjust the action slightly, because it's very difficult to stop the posts moving as you clean. If so, then what we'll make sure to do is to check the action and set it again when we put it back on, but that's easy to do. So I'm just giving everything a nice clean down with solvent, or naphtha we could call it, including the back of the neck, down the centre between the tuners, down the edges and so on. And then while I'm still here, down the fretboard, no, not the fretboard, the headstock, and then we'll do the fretboard last. That's nice, and I put a tiny bit of black cellulose here where a little bit of the black, that curl finish came off as well, so just to even it up I just put that little bit of black paint on there, which keeps it looking new. So really I'm cleaning up the bone dust and the stuff, the plastic dust and so on, but also pulling off any of the pen that might have got onto the sides of the frets, which quite often happens, so it's a good way of just cleaning it all off. Lovely. There's actually not much on there, so hardly any came off. So when that dries, then we can move to the next stage, which is a bit of oil. You can help it along a little bit there. This has got quite a weathered look anyway. It's satin to begin with, but it's also got some just general play wear on it, which I actually like. It's got a very dull finish to it, but a nice used look. It doesn't try. It's not relict, and it's not new, which has a nice lived, played in feel. Okay, so that's it. Yeah, it's got me thinking that the whole nut thing, because yeah, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to try and find a manufactured metal version of what Gibson used, the little cradle that they used for their original 0 fret adjustable nut. In fact, I wouldn't like to even begin to imagine what it would cost, so I'm not going to imagine, but in the absence of that, it'd be really nice to I still wish I could find something, so I'm basically having to make it. And you know, I'm not a metal fabricator type person, so unfortunately I can't turn my hand. This has actually been scuffed by hand over time, so it's kind of got worn. I don't know if somebody perhaps scuffed it up deliberately, a previous owner, but it's definitely worn more than the original satin finish, but it's still nice. Yeah, so anyway, I have to make my own solutions, which, you know, it takes a bit of experimentation, so that's what I'm currently on the lookout for. Still is ways of improving that nut function. But I think the payoff in the tuning stability is really quite noticeable, so I think it's worth the risk, or the experimentation I should say. So what I do when restringing this one is I'm putting on the middle two first, so that's the G and the D. I'm starting with the D. Run it all the way through. Remember, your adjustable nut at this point is loose, it can move, so you don't want to be bashing it. So I pull back one fret on this string and I hold it tight, go over the loose string the first time, keep spinning it around, and then go under the loose string the second time round, and that gives me a sort of a minimum amount of windings to hold the string nicely in place. And then I'll do the G string as well, which on this set is a hefty 18 hundredths of an inch. 18, oh, I don't know what it is, you know what I mean. 0.0 18,000th of an inch, whatever that unit is. So under the loose string the second time round, and then just get your finger out from underneath it, keep it under tension a little bit so it doesn't spring off anywhere, and then just gently load it, and that way now we've got the nut held in place. And what I'll do at that point is remove the excess string from these two already wound on, and we'll take care of that. Now we can get on to the rest of the strings in any order you like, really, because it's held down now. This slot on this adjuster here has taken a bit of a bashing with the wrong screwdriver at some point in the past, which is quite common on the adjusters on bridges. You have to have a pretty chunky screwdriver to fit in there, and most people don't have one kicking about the house, so quite often people make the adjustments with a smaller driver, and that ends up doing that gouging business. Again, very common. Okay, snip. Sometimes if you can't get access, slack the string back off so you can get right into the stalk, if you like, and so you don't have any more on that post than is absolutely necessary. And certainly you don't want any sticking out to spike your fingers, as I've paid the price far too many times for that. This is a really nice bridge, actually, this pre-compensated wraparound thing, and it's a real testament to how simple a bridge can be and yet how effective it still is. Guitar makers know that the relationship between the strings is pretty constant in terms of intonation on a 6-string electric, provided the only time it changes is if you're moving from a 3 wound and 3 plain to a 2 plain 4 wound situation when you go up the heavy gauges, and so for that you would need a different kind of bridge, because that 2 pairs of 3 staggered positioning wouldn't work for a wound G string. But you know, if you're a manufacturer and you know that your guitars are going out kind of with anything up to what we've got 11s here, possibly 12s. I think you might, by the time you get to a 12 set, you might be into the wound G department. But up to 11 type gauge, then that bridge will work perfectly well. It's quite funny when you consider it's a sort of oversight a little bit, because I made a guitar not so long back for a jazz player, and it was a headless guitar, and I used a traditional or familiar Chinese headless bridge unit that I've used many times before with good results. And it was only when I came to fit it that it just hit me that this bridge was never built for a 4 wound and 2 plain setup. And Aldo on this guitar wanted a wound or set with a wound G, flat wounds as well. So I had to actually modify the bridge to allow the G saddle to move to a position where it was never designed to be when they made it. Luckily it was not a major complication, it was perfectly capable of being drilled and tapped and so on, and then I made that work. But yeah, you know, it just kind of goes to show that I wasn't thinking of it in advance, and it can catch you out. So for example, if you bought this guitar, this PRS, and you said, no, I'm going to go and put a nice set of 12 jazz flat wounds on it, you might find yourself struggling to intonate the G, simply because that set of pre-compensated 2 groups of 3 staggers doesn't work for a wound G. So there we are. Anyway, so having put the strings on now, the first thing I'm going to do is give them a stretch. Now, the important thing about this, Jim, is everybody thinks they stretch their strings enough, and almost nobody does. And the reason I can tell you that is I get guitars here that have been strung sometimes as much as a year, or even in some cases 2 years previously, and the people have played them fairly regularly, and some people say that they've stretched the living daylights out of them and they're sure they're stable. And I can pull the strings and find a whole bunch of detuning, which proves, well, it's one of 2 things. proves either the tuners are unwinding, which never happens, or there's still slack remaining in the strings which hasn't been released. Now it's amazing how long that slack will stay in there, and the only way of getting it out, and people often contradict this, and they say things like, I'm going to tune it up a step and leave it overnight, or play it for an hour tuned up a step, and then after that it's all going to be perfectly stretched out. Now the thing is, you can tell yourself that it is, because what you'll do is you'll tune it and you go, look, it's in tune, lovely, and you'll play it, and then eventually you'll notice you have to tune it again, and then maybe a week after you've first thought you'd stretched everything out and done the right stuff, and then you go and play it and you get together with the band and you have to play that solo with a big 1.5 step bend on the E or some such, and then you suddenly find it's out of tune again. It's driving you mad, and see, detuned. So the point is, it's worth following the maxim that when you've stretched all the slack out the strings, they will stay in tune. Now the only caveat I put on that again is they'll stay in tune providing the nut slots are good. So the two components of going out of tune are nothing to do with the tuners. There's a video, a well-respected guitar YouTuber, I just happened to watch a video for some other reason about some issue or whatever. He was comparing guitars, and I watched his video and he talked about the two guitars in question having crappy tuners, and he said these guitars, neither of these guitars would stay in tune. It's terrible, so I'm going to change those tuners. And I promise you, for somebody experienced in guitars like he is, he's still hanging on to the wrong idea that it's not the tuners that are causing it to go out of tune. The crappy tuners will make a less pleasant tuning experience and a less precise tuning experience, but they will not unwind and go backwards to cause detuning. The only thing that causes that is the incorrectly cut nut slots, so there's friction holding onto the strings, and then that is equalized as you bend them and then goes out of tune, or it's the slack in your strings. Okay, so I'm going to keep on. I've done the nut slots because I've used this adjustable, custom-made adjustable nut. I know that's taking care of any friction, or most friction, in the nut slot. So that's that first 50% taken care of, and now I'm taking care of the next 50%. And the idea about this is that when I get this back to Jim and he plays it, this will pretty much, apart from the tuners being physically moved in the box, in the packaging when I send it back, which they will, so it won't necessarily be in tune when it comes out of the packaging. Once he's tuned it up and it's temperature stabilized for his house, he'll tune it up and play it, and he'll be able to play for a long time without that miserable endless hunting for getting it in tune. And that to me is probably, well, not probably, that is the #1 priority of qualities that I want in a guitar. That it plays and stays in tune. It can have a ton of other fabulous virtues, you know, like the best ever pickups. It could be a guitar, you know, as played by Dave Gilmour or Jimmy Page or something like that. But if it will not stay in tune and it will not play in tune, and you spend most of your time trying desperately to tune it when you're playing with other people or even on your own, it'll just stay on the shelf, or you'll put it back in its box. It just will not do it for you. You see how close we are to stretched out? Now currently the first fret action is set on here really, really low, and I'm kind of tempted to leave it like that because that's, you know, adjustable from this point. Now, given that you don't want to be cranking this nut up and down because the bass will eventually wear away if you spend too much time. The point of the adjustable nut is that you can do it a couple of times you know, to get it to where you want, or 6 months later if you change the strings you can adjust it back. That's the idea. It's a compromise, it's a custom made compromise, as you know, so it works brilliantly. This thing will now stay in tune until the cows cometh home. It is actually fraction low, so I'm not going to play the fool and go down that road, because the one downside is if I send it back this low, it's kind of cool to play, but all it takes is a sort of blast of Jim's central heating, for example, or you know, it to go to a part of the country which has a slightly different humidity or climate than this one, and then suddenly the clearance there, it might just disappear, and then suddenly it's just not playing the way I set it up. So that's no good to man nor beast, customer nor luthier. Right, so I'm just now hoiking out the last dregs of any stretch. And about the only thing then I won't have done so far on this is pull some bends, but these are 11s and I'm struggling to pull bends. I will struggle to pull bends. Be very careful when you do this in the on the high E string, because it's thinner. Look at that. Tiny bit. Now remember I said that this has moved slightly, so we just want to double check the playing action at the last fret before we commit to it. So that's a dead on 1.5 or a whiff above, and that is a fraction, well, I would say that's as close to 1 as you can get, so that's really low. That's pretty amazing. That's playable. But I think what I'm going to do, just for safety's sake, I'm just going to raise that up by, if I can find the screwdriver. I know where I put it. I put it somewhere sensible, didn't I? I'm going to just raise this high E a tiny fraction. Now you notice my screwdriver also has Gorilla Tape on it, just to make sure it's treating the metal as gently as possible. It's also the right size, so it's not going to slip and gouge. Okay, I'm happy with that. That's a pretty cool action all round. We'll just check it one more time. Yep. Now it will change slightly because I adjusted that. Lovely. As I say, the only adjustment you've got on the intonation is backwards on the whole bar, but you can do it one side or the other, and that gives you a chance to overall intonate it. Some people really hate that. I don't at all. I think it's so. Anybody who does this all the time will know that it's par for the course. You know that the correct intonation pattern is the same every time, other than the wound G. Now, we also know, those of us who do this all the time, also know that if you get one of these things out of sequence when you're doing individual saddles, if you find one out of sequence, almost the first thing you will suspect is the string. And lo and behold, it's almost always the string. Spot on, really. there, my dears, we have it. A day overdue, but nicely done all round in my book. What I have to do next is just refit our friend, the truss rod cover, and there's the screw. I don't wonder where it's gone. We've only got one fixing point on here, keeps it simple, so I just get that little dust down and we slip it under there, double it back up, get it into place, turn the tuner off, find the right little what's it, line it up with whatever you can have to hand, get it in its place, and then it's a matter of just fixing it down. And the only thing sometimes you have to watch out with is that it's going to try and, if it doesn't quite jam up against the nut, then it may try and spin round, so you just have to kind of hold it from turning with something else, and that's all I do. So with this guitar comes the little hex key for adjusting the neck nut. Also comes the old, what's it, I'll sand off the base of that so it's ready to be reused another time should you wish to do it. Just taking the wood, because this will make it slightly uneven. It's very, very small shards of rosewood, but we don't want it on there. Again, like I said, it's the cost of having so much glue on it, and everyone's guilty of that. I've been guilty of putting too much glue on in the past. You sort of desperately want the thing to stay in place, and so you commit the crime of blobbing too much glue into the slot. The result is that the next person who comes to remove it gouges out a bit of the rosewood, underlying rosewood. So this is nicely cleaned up now and be ready for reusing sometime should you want to. Probably this would go back in as it stands and probably work quite well. What I would suggest if you ever do use this again is take down all of this material, follow that advice that I mentioned earlier on yesterday. Leave some old strings in there and just literally this way around, just file with a regular rough file, whatever kind you got, but just file back until you start scraping the tops of the strings in all these slots, and then you'll know you've got no more material than you absolutely need, and these are too deep for use. But anyway, that will go back to Jim with this guitar. So I'm done on that one, so thank you very much for watching. Jim, thank you for sending it to me. I hope you enjoy the simplicity and the friction-free magic. But the secret, remember, you've got half of it in place, the friction-free nut slots. The next one is just take the time, 20 minutes of stretching before you play, and it will just be, it'll be fantastic. That you probably, knowing you as a gigging musician, you probably did that. One of the things that would have stopped your guitar staying in tune very well would have been the deep slots on this, regardless of what the material it was made of. The deep slots just cause friction, whether you like it or not. Okay, so I've got to find a little baggie to put these in to tape them gently to something, and then we're done. See you again.